Welcome to this podcast, part of Dulwich Choral Society's Spring 2021 season, where we'll be looking at Handel's famous coronation anthem, Zadok the Priest. First, a little introduction. King George II was proclaimed king on the 15th of June 1727, and that was followed by meetings of the Privy Council to discuss his coronation ceremony during August and September. Unfortunately, the organist and composer of the Chapel Royal, William Crofts, died on the 14th of August of that year. His successor, Maurice Green, would probably have expected to write the music for the ceremony, but by the 9th of September, it had become known that Mr. Handel, the famous composer to the opera, is appointed by the king to compose the anthem at the coronation, which is to be sung in Westminster Abbey at the grand ceremony. This coronation was meant to take place on the 4th of October, but in the event it was postponed to the 11th of October because of the likelihood of flooding in the Westminster area. Handel wrote 4 anthems for the service, setting 4 texts which had been also set for the coronation of James II in 1685, and the text of that ceremony had recently been reprinted. The words to Zadok the Priest from the first book of Kings have been used at every English coronation since that of King Edgar at Bath Abbey in 973, and Handel's setting has been used at every British coronation since 1727. A note by the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Wake, in his own copy of the order of service for this coronation, notes under the hymn Come Holy Ghost, this hymn by mistake of the music not sung, but the next anthem instead of it. That next anthem was Zadok the Priest. It opens with 22 of the most famous bars in the history of Western classical music, of course. I won't play those to you today because there are ample chances to hear some brilliant orchestras playing it, and I'll never quite recapture that on a piano. Note that the soprano part, the alto part, and the bass parts are all split at the beginning. So actually the first little chunk is in 7 parts, but thereafter it's a bit less complicated. We'll look at the beginning. So first of all, let's look at these 2 soprano parts. So we're in the key of D major, of course, a celebratory triumphant key. That's what we tried at the beginning. And our 2 soprano parts enter on those 2 notes with a nice, crisp Z. Enjoy using that Z as a way of throwing your voice into whichever space you're singing. So here's Zadok the Priest. And let's just try right at the beginning, soprano parts. I'll give you a bit of bass underneath too. 3, 4. So nice full 4 beats on that first section. Then the alto parts, think of the same thing. And also remember about the ends of the notes, not just the beginnings of the notes. Zadok the Priest, and a really good on the beat, on the 3rd beat of the bar there. So here we got alto parts, 3, 4. And you'll notice that the alto parts switch over there. So in bar 27, the alto part was on that B, and then down a 5th. And then the second alto part from bar 27 as well goes. So above first, and then below again for the end of that phrase. Talking of which, additions, there are lots of different editions of this piece, of course. My pick is probably the OUP edition, and That's a fantastic one, very clearly laid out with lots of historical notes as well at the beginning and bar numbers crucially, but I know there are some bar editions that don't have bar numbers. If you don't, I would advise you go through and just mark them out actually at the beginning of each line, so you always have an idea of which bar you're in before you start. And then here is just that tenor part on its own, just for this little section. Here we go, 3, 4. C-sharp there. And finally the bass parts. Here are the two bass parts, and listen to the extraordinary clash we have at the beginning of bar 2, 3, 4. So yeah, it's an amazing clash between the two bass parts at the beginning, and then the bass parts switch over, don't they? So the first part goes down a fifth there, the second part just down a tone onto Nathan, and the seconds lead down an octave and then back again, over the firsts, and then again they switch there, so the first are back on top, then the first go below again, and then up an augmented fourth, that's your interval of rising here. First, back to so there you go, there's your first section. Let's try that all together actually, before we get into the rest of the piece. I'll give you 2 bars in, why not? Section. And then, of course, all the people rejoiced. Here is this text from Kings. And we have this triple time figure here with lots of dotted rhythms, very celebratory again. And let's take 2 halves of the choir at a time. So we'll take the sopranos and altos a little bit below tempo at first. So those are the alto notes, alto 1s and alto 2s. And of course, pick whichever part you would normally sing in the choir. And there's the soprano part up above. And here we go, well, a little bit below tempo, this kind of speed. 1, 2, 3. So there's your first phrase. And just a note, in my edition, I've got little dotted notes as a guide above. Of course, Handel often didn't write dotted rhythms when he wanted them. He knew that people would just interpret it that way according to the customs of the time. But it's not always so clear as that, and sometimes we have to make decisions. I think that, given the rhythms in the orchestra, I think the altos would have almost certainly gone rejoice and mirrored what was happening in those string parts. Also, a quick note, rejoiced there only has a crotchet at the end of that first phrase, but then at the end of the next rejoiced, look, it's a minim this time, so it's 2 beats, rejoiced. So just again, be careful about the length of the ends of the phrases. Let's try that again, and then we're going to carry on this time. Here we go. Altos, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. And 1, 2. And carry on. So if you've got adagio written at the end of that little section, that wasn't Handel's original marking, but I think there's an implication that you take time with that and said there. And normally it's traditional to go rejoiced and said. This is kind of nice rhetorical gesture to do that, isn't it? So those are all the soprano and alto parts, and now the tenor and bass parts. Here we go. Here they are from the beginning, from bar 31, 2 Ds, 1, 2, 3. And again, dotted. And 1, 2. And 1, 2. Slightly roll the R. At the beginning of Rejoice, if you wish. 1, 2, just to make it really clear. And dotted again. And 1, 2. Voiced. So that's our second section. The movements in this particular coronation anthem are less clearly separated than in some of the others. For example, in Let Thy Hand Be Strengthened, where you have 3 movements that definitely stop and there's a short pause and then you carry on. Here, the movements are much more through composed, but we still have 3 different tempi, 3 different movements and 3 different time signatures. Let's try that all the way through. So here are your notes. This is everybody now from And All the People Rejoice, and I'll play bits of the orchestra now so you get a chance to hear how that fits in, and maybe just a notch faster now. 1, 2, 3. And then we're into our third and final section, God Save the King, Long Live the King, God Save the King, May the King live forever. And Handel's undoubtedly having a little bit of a joke about this, because this movement goes on for much longer than the first 2 movements, of course. Lots of repetitions of May the King live forever, emphasising the infinite realm of the King, which I'm sure would have gone down very well with him. God Save the King. So May the King live forever. There's always the question about whether to do a trill there. There's a trill written in the orchestral parts, not one written in the choral parts. Up to you at home. Have fun with a trill if you wish. Generally, today I've noticed most of the recent recordings of this tend not to put one in. So you just go, May the King live forever, and leave the trill to the violin. But that seems to me a little bit deprived of fun. So feel free to forever shake on it would be absolutely fine as well. Now, how should we divide this up? Of course, always a question, how are the parts fitting together? Well, one of the things I'd like to look at first is the semiquavers, because one of the features of this is these long runs of coloratura. For example, the bass part. There's the first thing we have at the end of bar 69 going into bar 72. And let's try each of these semiquaver passages in turn. So starting with that bass passage, but a little bit below tempo, because you want to really find this in your voice, find these notes, and then gradually speed it up if you want to learn it really, really well, with lots of proper supports, not the control coming from up here. Allow this all to be nice and free, and everything coming from down here. Instead, all the energy comes from there. Here we go. Let's try it a bit below speed though. 3. And very tricky because it rises at the end there, doesn't it? So you need a really, really good drive of energy right towards the end. This sense of always crescendoing through a line of coloratura like that, always growing, even if it doesn't actually rise all the time. In terms of the notes, also think of how to break it apart into little chunks. So, for example, so there's there's your first figure, and then so those are little chunks of it, aren't they? You know, sort of 5 notes at a time. So joining chunk, and then you can do 2 at a time. And then you can build it up again. You can do 4 at a time. Listen to this. And then go on. So those are various ways to practice those sections. You might want to start even slower than that, of course, which is fine, absolutely. You can, if you have a keyboard or a piano, you can sit and look at the notes like that. Otherwise, sing along to what I just gave you there. That's quite a long way below speed anyway. Then, of course, you can build it up in terms of tempo, and we'll do that gradually as we go through. At the basics, you get another chance to do that little section at the end. Here's the end of bar 84 now for the soprano. And have a little listen to this first. So, of course, all running in thirds there. Very, very celebratory music. Fortunately, you're all doubled in the orchestra, which helps. You've got orchestral players playing with you at the same time. Let's try that again below tempo. So this is just from where the semiquaver starts. Second soprano, first soprano, 2, 3. Again, that's one you can break up into chunks, just as I was with the basses. I'll give you a quick guide to how you might do that. So there's your first 5 notes, and then starting on the same note, there's your next 5, and then continuing like that. And then, as I said, building it up, so you have 9 notes at a time. Gradually building up the tempo as well. Various ways to make that work. Let's move ahead now. Of course, in the context of this podcast, we don't have time to do a full assessment of that. To bar 92, and we have the altos and the tenors, and also the first basses. The first basses and the tenors, they sing the same notes, and the altos all sing the same notes. So again, you're running in thirds. Here we go. 4, 1. Until the end, when the basses go down an octave, and then the tenors just go down a 4th, and altos stay on the note you are on. Do you want to try that one more time? That's not a hugely long one, only 7 beats of semiquavers, and we'll do it a little bit below tempo now. So here we go. 1. Of these things being videoed is that you can skip back at any point if you want to go over a piece of material again. And then finally, the basses at the end of bar 1, 1, 3. This is the same as you had at the beginning, but let's have a little listen to how it might work now a little bit faster. If you're not ready to do that, that's absolutely fine. Leave it out for now. But if you feel ready to do it, then let's have a go up to speed now. Here we go. 2, 3. lots more semiquavers, of course, in the orchestra parts around you. So now back to bar 63. Here's God Save the King. Long live the King, God Save the King. And what we'll do is we will do this first chunk in two halves. So we'll do sopranos and altos first. There's sopranos and there's altos. And here you go, a little bit faster, maybe 3, 4. Nice and triumphant. Almost like a trumpet chord. Altos. And then you're into your Amen section. And we'll take this with different groups of parts now. So now we will look at, in this little bit, the sopranos and the first altos. So starting with the sopranos at the end of bar 67, and coming in with the first altos there, and going all the way up to the end of this section. 2, 3... chunk of sopranos and the first altos, and of course you've got these little articulated quavers with breaks in between. To make sure you don't get into the habit of breathing in between each one, because then you'll end up over breathing. So maybe breathe every bar at the most. You might find you don't even need to breathe at all during that phrase, even though you've got all those rests. Amen. Actually, absolutely fine in one breath. So here now is the alto 2 and the tenor parts. So we're going to start with the tenor part at the end of bar 67, those last two quavers, and then the alto 2s join in on the next beat. 1, 2, 3. That next little chunk there, that's the tenors and the second altos. The basses, we've done most of your parts before, but we'll just cover this little Amen, Amen, Alleluia, Alleluia, Amen before. And here it is, 2, 3. And then we're into the semiquavers that we rehearsed before. And then it finishes with a... at the end of bar 73 and 74. Let's put the whole of that chunk together now and get a feeling of how it all fits at the same time. So here is back to bar 63. Here are your notes. Basses first, tenors, altos, and sopranos. 3, 4. Of the orchestra added in now. Then there's a lovely orchestral interlude for 4 bars or so before the next God Save the King, which is now in the dominant of D major, which is A major. So something quite different. Let's do these in groups of parts again, and we'll take just the sopranos on their own. I think until bar 87 at first. Here we go, sopranos on your own. 3, 4. that's known. And listen to this alto part now. Sopranos. And now the runs. So a little bit faster that time. Now let's go back and do the alto parts. So you start on the same note on an A. 3, 4. Together now. May the King Live, which is the next little section. So a couple of things to watch out for there. You'll notice the alto parts really switched over a lot in bar 83, didn't they? So it almost sounded like the upper line did that, but actually it was the seconds coming up to the G sharp and then back down again. So an interesting bit of writing there. I like the way that Handel does these overlapping parts that create melodies which nobody actually sings that you hear. And now going back to the tenors and the basses. First basses and tenors are on the same notes at the beginning of this. 3, 4. Tenors, you join the altos. Tricky little section there for the tenors. Look at how much you leap around once the quaver starts. It's a great bit of writing that, isn't it? Very angular though. Particularly that rising 7 is a tricky one to pitch. You'll notice you join the alto 2s there on the F sharp, if that helps. With that little section. Now let's continue with the next section from bar 88, and our pairs of parts here are going to start with the sopranos and the second basses. Here you go, sopranos and second basses. 3, 4. Sopranos and basses, and of course I picked those two parts, the second basses of course, because they have the quavers on the outside of all these semi-quaver runs in the middle in that last little bit we looked at. Now let's look at the first basses and the tenors. Here you go, first basses and tenors, 3, 4. Gradually building up the speed of these semi-quavers, if you've noticed that. Here are now the alto parts, and the seconds down there on the D, and the alto 1s on the F sharp from bar 88 again, 3, 4. Now a little section which takes us back eventually to the D major section, a little bit of minor now. Lovely little moment there with what we call a Neapolitan 6. That's the beginning of bar 96. Let's do our pairs of parts now. slightly more predictably because some of the parts come together. So we're going to start with the basses and the tenors. And here are your basses and tenors from bar 95, 3, 4. Now let's take a different pair of parts. We'll now take the sopranos and the alto twos, and I'll explain why in a second. So this is back to bar 95 again, alto twos, and first sopranos, well, all sopranos in fact, 3, 4. Sopranos have a different rhythm there to everyone else, and a amen, a dotted rhythm at the end there. And the alto ones, you do something different. You have these brilliant held notes, great fun, amen. Crescendo on them a little bit. Don't go too big at the beginning of the notes. Give yourself somewhere to go and grow into the first beat of the next bar each time. Here's just the alto one part on its own then. 3, 4. Now we're back into D major for our concluding couple of pages. Long live the King, God save the King, long live the King again, and now May the King live is treated differently. So let's do the first three long live the King, God save the King, long live the Kings first. Here they are from bar 103. Everyone together. 3, 4. Taking it in parts for the next May the King Live, we're going to do the sopranos and the tenors together. So here is your note for the sopranos and for the tenors. They're both B's. Here we go. 3, 4. There in bar 113 just for the last section, which of course, as we discussed, is actually the same as the previous bit that happened at the beginning of this movement. Now we'll do the alto parts together. This is back to 106, May the King Live, 3, 4. Starting together and then splitting. And crescendo again on this note. And now we'll do the basses. You're all together, here we go. So 3, 4. Your big bit of coloratura, of course, for the end basses. Let's try that now a little bit faster. So this is from the Amen semiquavers from the end of bar 113, and then we're going to go to the end. 2, 3. And everyone be aware, of course, into the adagio, there certainly has to be some kind of pull-up because there's not a rest. The orchestra, of course, there's a rest for you, but for the orchestra, they go. So they have to somehow pull up into that new tempo, I think. Makes sense. And now let's do the soprano parts together. The soprano and the alto 1 part from the end of bar 113. And then we're going to do alto 2s with the tenors. Here you go. End of bar 113, alto 1s and sopranos, 2, 3. See that full length note yet. So going back now to do the tenor and the alto 2 parts. There's your notes, end of bar 113 again, 2, 3. Together on the F sharp, and then so to conclude our study of this last movement, we're going to go all the way through with the orchestral parts, so I won't be able to give the individual parts the same amount of help as I was doing just then in those sections. But back to the beginning of God Save the King, bar 63, all the way to the end of Zadok the Priest. Here are your notes, basses, tenors, altos and sopranos. Here we go, 3, 4. adagio tempo. So that completes this podcast exploring Handel's Coronation anthem, Zadok the Priest. I very much hope you've enjoyed it, and if you'd like to find out more about Dulwich Choral Society, do get in touch via the website.